So I know it's January already, and honestly, I probably should have reviewed this movie before the new year started, but I was busy with a bunch of things, and I finally got a chance to see this movie, and I was hoping, too, that if I saw this movie, I maybe would put it on my best of the year list or something like that, or kind of like at least give it a chance because there's a lot of awards buzz and such, and now that I have seen the movie, I will say, yes, it is definitely worth it. So, A Complete Unknown was directed by James Mangold and it stars Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan, also features Edward Norton, Monica Barbaro, Boyd Holbrook, Elle Fanning, and it's about the rise of Bob Dylan, who at the time when he was in his early 20s, he was an up and coming musician. He was not interested in being famous and such. He was only interested in making music, and it's basically the rise, how he deals with fame, how he interacts with all these people and such, and that's this movie. So I'm gonna be honest, I was not entirely looking forward to this movie, despite the talents of James Mangold, despite the cast. I was kind of curious to see what this movie would be like. I'm not really a big fan of musician biopics. A lot of them in the last couple years have really disappointed me, like the Bob Marley one, the Whitney Houston one, and I was curious to see what this movie was going to be like because James Mangold has directed a pretty good biopic about a musician, Walk the Line, and ironically Johnny Cash also appears in this movie. So I was curious to see what this movie was going to be like, and I heard a lot of buzz, particularly for Timothy Chalamet. And honestly, after seeing this movie, yeah, I think it's definitely worth seeing. It's definitely one of the better musician biopics in the last couple years. So, what do I like about this movie? First off, I do think the actors do a fantastic job. Timothy Chalamet is really good in this movie. Honestly, one of his best performances in a long time. I was kind of curious because, like, obviously he's kind of this really big star, and I was kind of curious, like, is this kind of like a vanity project? Is this like a project where he's pretending to be Bob Dylan? But there are times where I'm watching him like he is not pretending to be Bob Dylan. He is Bob Dylan. I'm like, okay, he's really good in this movie. Edward Norton too is really good in this movie as kind of a mentor to Bob Dylan as Pete Seeger. You can definitely tell he's kind of having fun performing a lot of his songs in this movie. Probably the most fun he's had in a movie in a long time. Among the other actors, Monica Barbaro, I thought she was really good. She plays Joan Baez. I thought her relationship with Bob Dylan was very interesting, and it's definitely played out very well on the screen. Elle Fanning is also pretty good in this movie too. Boyd Holbrook steals the show in his few brief scenes as Johnny Cash, which I'm like, that's interesting that James Mangold directed Walk the Line and now has Johnny Cash in another movie. And I'm kind of surprised by that, but he does enough to make it his own. It's kind of like different from Joaquin Phoenix's performance, so he does pretty good with his very brief scenes. The music itself is also really good. Now, I am not really a fan of Bob Dylan. I haven't heard a lot of his music. I know a couple of his songs, but I'm not like going out my way to listen to his music. But the music definitely wants me to look up a lot of his music a lot more, kind of listen to it a bit more. And also the live singing is also surprisingly well done. It's like at times where it's like I was listening to it, I'm like, are they actually singing live? And it turns out pretty much everyone involved was singing live. Timothy Chalamet, Edward Norton, Monica Barbaro, Boyd Holbrook, all of them were singing live, and I'm like, wow, that is impressive. Again, he kind of just Timothy Chalamet sounds so much like Dylan. I kind of forgot. It's like, oh yeah, that's an actor playing him, and that's really good for an actor. It's like you can just go into a performance and kind of just lose yourself in a way. It's like that's more what acting is, and not just someone playing a character, which is what I was kind of worried that this movie was going to be about. And I do think the approach to Dylan's life is very interesting because it kind of tries to go against the norms of like a lot of these famous people and such who kind of had like these big highs and these low lows and such. It doesn't go for the generic stuff you would see in a biopic, like they got addicted to drugs and such. But like I do think it is very fascinating in how he approaches the aspect of fame. Like it's clearly obvious that Dylan didn't want to make music to be famous. He wanted to make music because he wanted to express himself in a weird way, and he constantly felt like he wanted to kind of tell people off and say, hey, I want to do me. I don't care what other people think of me. I do think it is very fascinating. And there aren't a lot of major cliches in this movie. Don't get me wrong. There are a few cliches, which, in a biopic like this, you're probably going to have a few cliches. But I never was annoyed by the cliches. Everything kind of felt natural. Like there's a couple moments where people turn against Dylan, and it does at least feel natural. It does feel a lot more grounded than a lot of these other biopics where I feel like a lot of them kind of feel like they're fantasies and sometimes, and it's like weird because like they are, supposed to be real stories and such, but no, this actually does feel a lot more realistic than a lot of those other movies. And at least no one says, he's a 1 in a million talent and such. I mean, a couple people do say he's very talented and such, but I never really felt like, they went out of his way to make it seem like this is like the most important person who ever existed. I do think that's worked. That works in its favor. It definitely does not feel like a vanity project, which again I was very worried about with this cast and such. But like, it definitely feels a lot more grounded. Like there's actually a respect for the people that they were playing and such, and people whose lives they're showing and such. It is very effective. So, are there any things I don't like about this movie? Well, first off, the whole electric controversy. A lot of people were very upset when Dylan went electric, and the movie eventually builds up to that, but I feel like they could have played into it a little bit more throughout the movie and such. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something where it's like, he constantly tried to change his sound and such, but I do think they could have played it up a little bit more, so by the end of the last movie, by the end of the scene, by the end of the movie with the last scene where he goes full electric for a performance and such, I feel like it would have been a little bit more interesting. Also, again, there are definitely some cliches, some lines of dialogue where I'm like, yeah, I've heard this in a few other musician biopics within the last few years, and I'm like, can't they just... Do they have the same screenwriter? Because, like, they're just throwing out the same lines I've heard in some of these other, maybe not so great biopics and such. Again, it still feels grounded enough to the point where I'm like, I'm not too upset about the cliches and such. Also, despite the fact that this movie is 2 hours and 20 minutes long, admittedly, I never felt the length. But I did feel like the ending was just very abrupt. I'm like, oh, it's over? Okay. Didn't really feel like much of an ending, but could have done a little bit better with the ending, I feel like. But then again, if I'm watching a movie and I'm invested, no matter how long the movie is, and I'm upset that a movie's over, I think it did its job. So a movie like this, honestly, I kind of went in going, it could be interesting, and now I'm saying, this is honestly one of my favorite biopics in the last few years. The acting is fantastic, the music, and particularly the live singing is very well done. The approach to Dylan's life is very interesting as well as its comments about fame and such, about like how, he didn't want to be famous and how he tried to kind of change his sound just to, avoid all that BS and such. And I do like that. Definitely feels a lot more grounded than a lot of other musician biopics out there. And even though there are some cliches, I feel like some things could have been a little bit better with some of the aspects of his life. And also, the ending kind of just felt a little bit abrupt. I would say this is definitely worth watching. Definitely worth moving my best of the year list a few days just to kind of talk about it at least. I'll give A Complete Unknown 3.5 out of 4 stars. See it. So, who's a musician that you want to see a biopic on? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.